The Nigerian Senate has approved 234 billion naira for the Independent National Electoral Commission to conduct next year's presidential election.
Indeed, that is no longer news anyway. So the amount is about 7.9 billion naira, less than the 242 billion naira requested by President Muhammadu Buhari for the conduct of that election. Now, also approved is the 189 billion naira for the funding of the 2019 elections to be moved from both recurrent and capital components of the Special Intervention Program captured in the service-wide votes of the 2018 Appropriation Act.
Well, Femi Lawson, a public affairs analyst, is here with us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
So the argument now is, where do we get the excess from? The Senate is saying, use money from the service
exactly.
vote. The federal government is saying there are projects that you guys have added to the budget. You can use part of it.
Of the money
What way forward at such a time like this?
It is still very unfortunate that even after 2 months of recess and now that the National Assembly has finally ratified the budget, we are still not really making headway. And every time issues like this comes up, we must always count the days. How many days do we have to the general elections? And the general elections are not what starts from the polling booth. There are processes that INEC must embark upon before, February, that the general elections will be coming. And I think this should be of serious concern to both the National Assembly and the executive arm. Now, this issue has been raised before the budget was eventually ratified. Where is this funding coming from? The legislators are not ready to shift ground, allowing the executive to take from the already approved budget for their constituency project. The SIP being a major program of the incumbent administration, whether you like it or not, is one of the major programs that the government has been using to reach out to the ordinary people. And in an election year, it will not be wise to actually, to them, not cut funding of such projects. So now we are confronted with an executive that is trying to protect its own interests and a National Assembly that is. Well, I think at this point in time, the collective interest, which is the national interest, must be brought to bear. And that is why it is very important that as soon as possible, the National Assembly leadership and the executive sit together and harmonize position on where funding for this approved budget will be taken from.
For the sake of Nigerians and the sake of democracy.
Yes.
But then that seems not to happen at this time. And it seems many are suspecting it could even be worse because of the political standing of the chief officers of the National Assembly now. Yeah,
you are very correct. Now the National Assembly, both chambers, are now headed by members of the key opposition political parties, PDP. The executive, of course, still controlled by the ruling party. And of course, there have been issues around the leadership and the fact that, whether you like it or not, there have been hostility as far as relationship between the executive and. But I think the time I read a statement from the Senior Special Assistant to the President of the National Assembly, Matters yesterday, and I think it's encouraging that he has expressed the readiness of the presidency to meet with the National Assembly. And I think the National Assembly must take this advantage, not just in the interest of their own, not only in their own interest, but in the interest of democracy, like rightly said, and the collective interest of the nation. We must understand that the fight, as it is, primary party this and that, are possible because we have a democracy. And when there is no election, there will be stalemate. And we must always understand that most of these items that have been that appropriation has been made for by the National Assembly are majorly things that has to be procured by INEC overseas. And these are not readily available tools that you go to the open market to purchase. So these factors have to be considered. The preparation of INEC must be given the utmost priority by the virtue of what they need to do now. And I think the National Assembly and the executive must consider this in whatever dealing they have to do, in whatever resolution they have to come to. But I think there is time, and it is now, that they have to sit together and harmonize positions on where this funding has to come from.
There are some who have even given kudos to the Senate for sheathing the sword, because prior to the, reconvening of the House, the issues were, oh, we need to impeach the Senate President, also impeach the Speaker of the House of Reps. But then that did not happen. Would you say that this is an issue of political interest? Because some would say once they get to the Red Chamber, it's not whether you're APC or PDP. At this point in time, all of them are united against having their money being taken by the federal government. That's an unfortunate situation we find ourselves, and that's why we have always admonished Nigerians to always realize that a lot of times when the representatives, not only in the National Assembly, even in other arms of government, gets to the round table, the parties, their religion, their tribes are always not issues of consideration. That's right. And that's what we have seen playing out in the quick approval given to the budget when everybody came back. Even though there are legitimate processes that has to be taken if a National Assembly or leader has to be removed or not. But the truth is that they were united, like you rightly observed, and there has been no opposing voice. That's very instructive. From the National Assembly to the decision of the National Assembly to not to allow the executive to take from the already approved constituency project allocation. So I think this is one reason for the executive to also know the character of people who it claims are actually protecting its interests within the National Assembly. It's also important for the ordinary Nigerians who are killing themselves because of these political actors to also know if truly these people are united for the purpose, are divided for the purpose of our collective interest or for just for the purpose of sharing. Well, and it has exhibited itself because not even the vocal oppositions to the National Assembly leadership could raise issues around the demand by the presidency to have this money taken from the constituency project allocation rather than taking it from the SIP. Yes. So I think it is very instructive for Nigerians to also know that as far as that chamber is concerned and as far as every other category, level of government is concerned in Nigeria, it is usually about selves when they are on the table rather than about the But when you say self, I'm just wondering if the money was meant for them. It was supposed to be for their constituencies, right?
Are they saying the money is meant for them?
No, because when the way it's putting it is like it is their money.
It is a common knowledge that today the average legislature gets between 10 to 13.5 million as running costs, so to put it on a monthly basis, and some other allowances some that could not really be defined. But the truth is that the constituency project, since 1999 in particular, has been one of the major cash cows for legislators in this country. In most cases, they claim they don't nominate contractors. They claim, no, it is the SDG offices, the MDG offices that execute this project. But we know, as the ordinary Nigerians, that a lot of these projects, they are citing, even the contractors are influenced, by these legislators. And we have seen how the budget in a lot of instances have been manipulated to suit, interest of certain persons, particularly those in the leadership of the various assemblies. So I would not want to agree that it is not about them.
Are you trying to take us back to the days of budget padding? Okay, move on. No. Okay, the Independent National Electoral Commission notes the word independent.
Yep.
Many are saying, of course, we've seen that it's not quite independent when it comes to funding. Yep. Would it be instructive and very good for Nigeria's democracy if somehow this electoral body becomes institutionalized in a way that it exists on its own? It depends on no one for funding, so you don't need to really seek recourse at the National Assembly before you get any fund approved. Because it seems that this has become a problem every 4 years, going into an election year.
Well, I think we are evolving as a democracy, and as we keep advancing, I know of course, there will be tendency for changes across not only on how the election body is managed, even in how it sources for its finances. And I think it is important to note that between 1999 and now, there has been improvement even in the manner that which the electoral bodies get support from external bodies. And I think as we move on, when we allow the INEC, as it is in Nigeria, to become totally independent, there may be need, there may not be need any longer for the INEC to wait on the executive to push its budget to the National Assembly. I know we'll get to that stage that there may be a properly constituted body
that will supervise INEC, which may not necessarily be under the control of the presidency or the National Assembly. And by so doing, there must have been a national proviso on where the fund, it may be from deductions from particular source or sources in future, where we will know that there's a particular fund consolidated somewhere for the purposes of elections in Nigeria. But I think as we move on, we'll get to that stage. And Electoral Act is subject to review almost at all times. Even the Constitution is subject to amendment. But I think we have to keep, demanding for changes in the process. And that is what we are saying today in INEC. A lot of reforms are going on. And you cannot take that away from the fact that Nigerians are speaking. And now we have a leadership in the commission that is also listening to the yearnings of Nigerians. And I think if we continue to have the manner of leadership we have in INEC now, and Nigerians continue to engage the electoral body, see the electoral process as their own, I know the commission and even the system itself will be forced to change to better ways of managing elections and also getting funding.
Elections, no doubt, are basic to democracies.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Around the world. And of course, the National Assembly showed us that when they prioritized this bill, the moment they resumed. But there are some who are concerned about how much money we are, using for elections. For instance, the 234 billion naira is far higher than how much the federal government has been able to implement for its social intervention fund. Bulk of this money is also going into security for election. How do we evolve our electoral system such that we and buying, flying jets, paying personnel? We've seen elections in this country where 40,000 policemen were deployed for just a single state election. How far are we from that, future of not having to over-police or militarize our elections?
Until we make elective positions less lucrative, until it is seen as service to the people, until we begin to make public officers see it as a part-time responsibility, especially those in the legislature, until we begin to let people who are elected know that they are subject to recall at any time, they are subject to removal at any time, until these elective officers begin to fear the electorate, we may not really get to that point where today there's desperation for power, particularly from the major political parties in the country. Today, people are ready to do the least expected just because we saw what happened across the country during the party primaries. You can imagine internal affairs of political parties. Look at the number of it generated. Look at the number of violence situations recorded. Until we get to a point where we make these offices less lucrative, until we get to a point where people will not see politics as a business, until people will have careers before they go into politics, then we may not really be able to achieve that. Politics must not be a full-time job.
Yes,
it should not be an occupation. But today it's an occupation for virtually most of the political actors in Nigeria, and that is why they are ready to do.
And why is it a full-time job, really? It seems to be clear to many Nigerians that is the easiest way to make money. When a country is faced with stark reality of poverty, when many graduates are out there looking for jobs after years of graduation, and they see the opportunity of going into politics. So I'm asking this question because you're saying, because what you just depicted is like a utopia.
No, in making
a place where everything is so
I'll still go back to making it less lucrative.
Is it going to be really to achieve all that?
It is very achievable.
To make the electorate very powerful.
We must cut the salaries, the allowances, the remunerations that are given to public office holders in this country. It is in this country that you serve as a governor for 8 years, live in a free house, ride free cars, use free petrol, and you are living and you are still paid.
Femi, who has the power to do all that? To put all those measures in place?
It is by ensuring that we reform the system. And that is why we keep
you know what I'm asking you? Because it is those in the legislative.
No, it is within our power, citizens,
the executive that will do that.
For restructuring of the system.
Except you're calling for a referendum, which is not available in our constitution as we speak.
The constitution, we are not made for the constitution. The constitution is made for us.
It's all right.
And it is subject to review.
Public affairs analyst.
Femi Lawson, we just have to stop it here because of time.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting discussion. Thank you for coming on the show.